I want to talk today about the differences between near-field and far-field monitoring. Now, I think most of us who are involved in the recording arts know the difference. Near-field, let's move this, is when the monitors are right here. They're in the near field. They are very near to me. And a lot of times recording engineers will have a set of NS10s or their favorite speakers that are fairly close, and as they're sitting here mixing, they'll have their near field monitors, and hopefully, if they're pros, they also have far field monitors, and they'll make a mix between the two. But I've noticed an increasing tendency today, especially in some of the better home studios, but even in some of the pro studios, to really just get used to the near field monitoring, and it's easy to see why. First off, near field monitoring is kind of like the best of both worlds between headphones, which are definitely near field monitors. That sucker is pretty near, your ears. But there is so much detail, so much less distraction from the room that you really hear what's going on in the mix. And that's great. The problem is, who is your audience? Are your people that you intend to listen to this also listening near field? Now, some recording engineers are so experienced that they can mentally make the shift from near field to far field. And I wanted to talk for a second about some of the differences that the two present. So the first big difference, when you have a near field monitor, two things are very different than far field. The first is the bass response. When you're in the near field of a speaker, you are getting much more bass relative to all the other frequencies, or a flatter bass response in regards to the other frequency than one would from a far field monitor. And the reason for that is, in a speaker, I'll go around here and see if I don't kill myself to demonstrate. Speakers have what we call a baffle. This front part is the baffle. Now the baffle is like a projection board, if you will. When the tweeter makes sound, high frequencies come out, they project off of this baffle, and they head out into space and hit your ear. And so too does the mid-range and the woofer. But the woofer's low frequency response is very, very long waves. And so what happens is, it'll bounce just a little bit off this front baffle, and then it wraps around, hits the walls, bounces back, does standing waves, all the things that our crazy bass woofers do. But as the frequencies get higher, the baffle becomes more important, unless you're standing in the near field of the speaker. If you're in the near field of the speaker, then this wraparound energy loss within the room of the bass tends to make the bass sound flatter than it would if you were in the far field. And why does that matter? Well, imagine if you're a mixing engineer and you're looking to have this played back in somebody's home. In that case, you're going to adjust the bass to where it sounds good to your ears in the near field. When it's played back in the far field, it's going to have less bass, and so it's going to sound kind of thin. We see this a lot, even at Octave Records, where we have to go back and tell the mix engineer, no, please, push the speakers back and at least give a listen to the far field. Make your adjustments for levels on the bass to get things right so that you have a good blend between near field and far field. In fact, well, to be honest, in Octave Records, we do everything in the far field, and we do that for a reason, because we're really fortunate. We have a very specific audience. Our audience listens on 2-channel stereo systems that are in the far field. Headphones, far field listening, almost never near field listening. And we don't produce music that is played in the car, on earbuds. So for our purposes, we do high-end recordings for high-end stereo systems, right? So that's really cool because we know our audience. But if you're a standard mix engineer, you don't know if it's going to be played in a car, on earbuds, on a clock radio, so you got to make it kind of work for all. The second thing that I will bring up about Nearfield and Farfield is imaging. So when we have a mix, we're trying to create an image as if the musicians were in the room with us, at least to make it sound realistic. The singer's in the center, the guitar player's over to the side, and there's a space around them. And we do that through the pan pots, through various microphone distances, etc. If you're in the near field, you're going to think that you have a very wide image. Why? Well, because the speakers are closer to your ears and you don't have this perfect equilateral triangle that in the far field we strive for. Also, you don't have the room reflections. Much of what we hear in stereo in a typical home setting happens because of the room. And near field listening eliminates most of the room. So as you're mixing, you're not paying attention to how this is going to reproduce in the room. So what we wind up with is somewhat truncated width-wise sound stages, often with good depth, but truncated. So smaller width, kind of squeezed up. Because it sounds good in the near field, put it in the far field where we want this big spacious sound, we don't get it. So those are the kind of issues that I think one must be aware of when you're deciding on your mix. So do be careful to consider the audience. Where is it going to be played? And who's going to be listening to it and for what reason? And the best way to go about it, if you're not lucky like we are at Octave Records, where we know our audience, we know they want a big spacious sound, we know they want it to sound like people are literally in the room, which is why we do DSD, which is why we do all this stuff. But you probably aren't that lucky, and you're going to try and reach a broader audience. So do be cognizant of the fact that near field and far field listening are very different, and a good blend between the two is really important. Okay, thanks for listening and watching. I'll talk to you later. Bye.